Welcome. Welcome to the show, everybody. Um,
Happy to see you guys.
Yeah, very
yeah.
happy to be
Yeah.
with you.
So I'm gonna, the purpose of this discussion weekly series is to just cover a bunch of different topics. This is kind of loosely related to sustainability in the biosphere as a general theme, focusing on different kind of aspects of that. Like last week we had a specialist on disaster risk management come in and just talk about her stuff. And next week we've got a really excellent prof from UVic talking about economic modeling, and she does like economy versus climate change and does modeling along that those, like Katya Roach. Really
Ooh,
good.
that's great.
No, she's a rock star. She's very, very good. And her big thing is demonstrating that you can have economic growth that's decarbonized, right?
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
Yes.
which
I
is, so that's kind of like to really kind of put the analytics behind all that stuff. But this
Yeah.
week we have you two special human beings. So I'm gonna just introduce who you are, and then maybe if you want to talk a bit about, your organization and what you're doing and how that relates to the biosphere. So I'll start with Nina. So Nina Lantinga from Montreal, Quebec, who is the founder and CEO of Lantinga Vita. How do you say
That was
the
perfect. Lantinga Vita, yeah.
Lantinga Vita? Where did you get the name for the company from? Well, obviously your name, but what's
Yeah,
the Vita part?
the Vita, well, it means life.
Yeah,
And when I first, I guess it ties in a bit to the company in the introduction, but
yeah,
when I first conceptualized the company, I mean, the idea was something, the idea was a multifunctional bag that could be used for, multifaceted people, every aspect of your life is essentially.
yeah,
And as I started kind of the process of sort of designing and all that, which was all very new to me at the time, like I came
yeah,
from a research background originally, and then
yeah,
sort of ended up in entrepreneurship and fashion.
yeah,
And so a lot of the things I wanted to develop when I was thinking, I'm like, okay, what is this going to take on? Like, what's the mission? And sort of
yeah.
reflecting on all that. Life was just it kind of fell into everything. And so whether it's life on Earth, whether it's your own personal life, an extension of who you are,
Okay.
and also like the logo having a circle in it, which now even represents more in terms of circularity. But that was something because I'm like, life is always a full circle. It's always about a regeneration process, and like
Right.
that kind of feeling of positivity and light and nature is something that I want to bring on from day one.
Okay.
So that's sort of where that all fits in together. And I didn't actually want to use my last name in the company for just I just something I didn't want to do. And then someone that was helping me develop things at first just came with the logo, came with the name Lantinga Vita, and I was like, that's perfect. It represents
It's a good,
everything that, yeah. So just kind of
it's a good name. It works. Like it's got a nice
Yeah, it is.
ring to it.
It's a
And
good
you
name.
found, when
Yeah.
did you found your company? What year did you found it in?
I founded it in 2014. So
Yeah.
it was what got me into it was essentially it was the McGill Dobson Cup. So I had this idea. I was at
Ah,
McGill taking some extra classes
yeah.
and trying to figure out what to do with life in general.
Yeah.
And took a marketing class, and that's when sort of the idea for this product came up. And then the McGill Dobson Cup
Okay.
was sort of where everything started. So yeah, that was
Awesome.
2014. But the first product launch was, I feel like it was until 2017 or so.
Okay.
So yeah.
Awesome. And Emily Charry, how do you,
Charry.
Charry
Yep.
Tissier.
Charry Tissier. Yep.
And you're originally from, are you from Montreal originally? Where are you originally from?
No, I'm not. I was born in France, but I was
Oh,
raised in Minnesota.
okay. Okay. And
Yep.
you founded Whale Seeker and are co-founded Whale Seeker,
Yep.
and you're the CEO of Whale Seeker, which is a company that's doing some really cool stuff with imagery and detection of whale paths and migrations, and helping ships avoid them, and many other things that we'll hear about. So
Yeah, that's right. I'm a biologist,
yeah.
and right, and my husband is a marine biologist.
Mhm.
And so we've been working on and off together on lots of different projects for a decade. And during my maternity leave, we got a WWF Arctic Species Grant.
Mhm.
And Bertrand, my husband's master's at McGill, was assessing aerial images of narwhals
Mhm.
for like demographic information, so sex and age, to see if we can glean more information from aerial images. And so once he was done with that, he created this protocol, and there was a real need for more of that analysis. So we applied for a WWF Arctic Species Grant. We got it, and we started analyzing like 6,000 images. And you don't even need to do 50 before you think there's got to be a better way to do this than by hand, for crying out loud.
Mhm.
And so with the money from WWF, we decided to see if we couldn't outsource the detection, if there wasn't an AI solution for this.
Mhm.
And we found that there were companies that offered this as a solution, but
Mhm.
we couldn't even get them on the phone if we couldn't guarantee a six-figure contract with them.
Okay.
And so we saw that this was a gap in lots of different industries,
Mhm.
and we decided to just tackle it ourselves. So we got a third technical co-founder,
Mhm.
and in 2018 created Whale Seeker
Mhm.
to solve this problem of automatically detecting whales from remote sensed imagery. So that's either aerial, satellite, or infrared.
Mhm.
And so far so good. It's been we've had the opportunity to work with lots of different industries, and they're the reasons that people want to detect whales are varied. So they vary from altruistic to needing to comply with federal regulations.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't really matter because they all have the same pain point, which is needing to detect whales faster, more cheaply, efficiently, accurately. And so, yeah, we decided to just create a company and offer that service to anyone who needed it.
Mhm. So Nina, how did you, because you could have started just an apparel company, right?
Yeah.
What inspired you to arrive at like the unique approach? So maybe describe what's unique about your products as opposed to a handbag from like Louis Vuitton.
So many things. No. But, I mean, the first approach was really to do something that was multifunctional, because I thought instead of having five things that do one thing, why can't I have one thing that does everything that I need, right?
Mhm.
Because I don't think this is just a female problem. But like switching from bag to bag is just annoying.
Mhm.
Um, and at the time, I was someone, who sports, went to the gym, like, went to school, university, multiple jobs, all that. So you're constantly running around. And I was like, can't I have something where like my banana doesn't get squished and this works, and just something more functional?
Mhm.
So that was the first thing. But then, like, what was interesting is I knew nothing about materials. Like, I had sewn a bit as a kid, but I really didn't know anything about the fashion industry until I sort of got into it, and I started looking for manufacturers, started looking for textiles.
Mhm.
And it became extremely quickly apparent that there's a lot of ethical issues. Like, I remember having interactions with manufacturers, because everyone told me at first, when I was doing the Dobson Cup and sort of developing things, like, oh, everything's done in China, just go to China, go to China.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, what are standards and how does this work and how do I make sure everything's ethical? Because of course you hear stories, but until you sort of get your hands dirty and sort of really start exploring it, you don't see how bad it really is. And yeah, I remember asking questions, and these were ISO certified companies that were supposed to be reputable, and asking basic questions like what are workers' salaries, just because I was curious. And they would send me these reports, but they're like, oh, don't worry, because I could see the breakdown of materials and the cost, but I couldn't see a salary for a person making it. And I was like, well, that's strange. So
Yeah.
there were like flags like that at first I was like, well, I guess it's coming from values, and I just couldn't justify putting another product into the world that didn't respect humans, on a basic level. I was like, if
Mhm.
someone's salary is not accounted for,
Mhm.
I can only deduct certain, there's certain deductions I can make from that. And then from a materials perspective, just seeing the pace at which things were typically made, and how they were made, it became really clear as well that I'm like, things are made to be disposable.
Mhm.
Uh, that's how the industry works. And I found things out like, oh yeah, but 1 out of 7 will end up in the trash before it gets off the production line. So I was like, well, that's also a problem. And
Mhm.
so I just I was trying to find either higher quality materials, things that were sort of certified, things that were recycled. And I was surprised at how difficult it was to source these materials. So I guess to sort of sum it up, what makes it different is when I, after a few years of exploring these things, which is also why it took so long to launch, because I was trying to do it right, I discovered Aquaphyl. So the first products weren't made with these textiles. They were made with just really high quality materials from Italy that were REACH certified, so ensured there weren't harmful chemicals. And then eventually, yeah, I came upon Aquaphyl, which is a circular yarn made from ghost fishing gear. So that, when I saw that model, I was so blown away, because that was the first time that I saw something that I felt was really, I mean, nothing's perfect in this world, but it's as close to perfection as you can get, because it comes from waste. It protects the ocean because we're taking ghost fishing gear out of the ocean. And then on top of that, it can, at the end of its life, so when the product is no longer usable, it can then be regenerated into the same yarn over and over again.
Right.
So, okay, this is a solution. And so that's what I think really differentiates from like an ethical and environmental standpoint.
Okay, cool. So you touched on one thing there, which is, there's a lot of other things, which is ghost nets. And I wanted to get to, so Jason, Nina, sounds like you have a great LCA. Yeah, well, we'll get into that, Jason. So those that are just observing, like audience members, feel free to shoot your questions in. We kind of got some guiding questions to just to go with the flow, but we'll answer questions either at the end or if they come up, but we'll definitely have time for questions. So please, just if it comes to you, just shoot it off in the chat box and we'll get to it. But ghost nets. So, I mean, that's a big problem. And in fact, I didn't know much about ghost nets before I met you, Nina. I think I may have had heard of it, but not like, it's like, well, whatever, there's nets out there. Like there's a lot of stuff in the ocean, but it's a big problem, right? Like what's the magnitude of this problem?
I want to make sure I have my exact figures, but it's basically, it's the biggest plastic problem in the ocean. So if we do a comparison, I always forget, I don't know why I always mix up whether it's 46 or 47%, but of all plastic in the ocean is ghost fishing gear. Now, if we compare that to a straw, which a lot of, there was big deal made about straws, which again, straws are not great, but that's 0.01% of the problem. Water bottles are about 10% of the problem. And so what we're not addressing the core issue when we're looking at waste in the ocean. And then that's also not considering, the entanglement, which I'm sure we'll get into as well, but like the impact on biodiversity is massive. So it's not just the pollution, but it's also, and I think if we look at macroplastics specifically, it's 70% of macroplastics. And that's based on studies that were done in well, my words are leaving me, the Great Ocean, Emily, what is it?
The Pacific?
The words was like
the big ocean. Yeah, that big body of water.
It's late here in Montreal. Yeah.
It's 9 o'clock. The words are starting to lose now. But yeah, essentially, yeah. So that's what that is.
But in terms of, so like, there's that, but there's this multitude of different things going on in the ocean. And in fact, I think, like, I'm just me, I haven't been an ocean person. I've been a forest person forever, like up until like this last few years, is with the coastal zone stuff I'm doing now. I'm getting more into the ocean world, like fishing, fisheries and stuff. And there's so many problems, and it's this, I guess it doesn't like hit us as much because we're not out on the ocean all the time. We're not submersed in the ocean. Whereas, if we want to see litter and like deforestation, that's one that just hits human beings. We see the Amazon getting scorched. So what are some of those like big biospheric issues or environmental issues in the ocean and the marine environment that really, like get you? Like, Emily, what would be one that kind of just like, oh my God, it's the impact on habitat? What are the things that really kind of just alarm you?
Yeah, so a lot of the assumptions that we make about, what we understand about the ocean world are just that, assumptions. And there's a big gap in knowledge in a lot of this research. So for example, in Canada, in the past, we've assumed that, maybe 5% of the whale population was impacted by fishing gear. And a recent study showed, well, what they did was really interesting, was they took drones and they flew over whales and they looked at the scars on the whales, not just whether the whales were actively entangled, but do they have scars on their their fins or on their flukes, on their tails,
Mhm.
and on other places that are indicative of having been entangled, and then they've probably freed themselves in the past. And for right whales, or not for right whales, but for fin whales and for blue whales, which is the biggest living mammal ever to have existed, it's between 40 and 60% instead of 5%. So big difference, big difference in the impact that it's actually having. And so one of the big problems is that, humans only ever observe what they can see. And so looking at scars allows us to see what humans didn't observe actively, but what might have happened in the past. So just to see that between 40 and 60% of these great whales have evidence of having been ensnared in fishing gear means that it's a much bigger problem than we've thought of in the past. And this study was just published this year, a couple of months ago. So it's a really active environment. It's active research. We need to learn more about it in order to tackle the problem. We need to understand at the root, what is the magnitude of this problem, and how does it impact other species? How is it different among different fisheries? So there are a lot of unknowns still, but just to understand that this is a bigger problem than we thought it was is a big first step.
And then in addition to that, we all have ocean acidification, sea surface temperature change, and all these other kind of longer term,
That's right.
but maybe more like slower moving variables and so forth.
Right.
So given the fact that like we've got this big problem going on here, what is it like, you get called to talk at events regularly, right? And what can you say that like, from your sustainability standpoint, both of you for your organization, how, if someone asks you, say, what are you doing? Like if your kid asks you, says, look, what are you doing to make the world a better place or the environment better? What is it that one of the many things that you're doing that's having a positive impact from a sustainability standpoint?
Yeah, so Whale Seeker, at least, we believe that whales and humans can coexist in healthy and profitable ways. It can be win-win.
Mhm.
And we believe that we're just lacking the data and the tools to best coordinate those actions. And those tools are available. It's just that they're not made in a way that the general public can consume affordably. And so that's what Whale Seeker is working on, is easy, fast, reliable, accessible whale detection for anyone who needs it.
Mhm.
And so that's the start of what we're willing to offer.
Mhm.
And then from this starting point, there's collaborations like Nina and I have created, which is a nonprofit called Nets for Net Zero.
Mhm.
And we found each other through the B Corp community. So Nina and I both are CEOs of for-profit companies,
Mhm.
but we're very interested in making sure that our growth as a company is sustainable and ethical. And that means internal governance and making sure that we're responsible to the environment and society at large. And Nina contacted me after a B Corp breakfast, and
Mhm.
she said, I think there's a collaboration that we can have. And I thought to myself, I don't think you understand what my company does. We just detect whales. We use artificial intelligence and detect whales quickly and quick and accessibly. And Nina has a fashion company. I didn't see the link, but this whole ghost gear business, Nina was right on the money. And so there is a need to address the ghost gear problem, to understand the ghost gear problem much better. And so on top of Nina and I both having environmentally conscious companies that address biodiversity and climate change, and ethical issues in terms of growing our companies sustainably, we've created a nonprofit and we are tackling this problem directly together. Yeah.
And Nina, so you've already alluded to the fashion world, but you've managed to connect the problems of the fashion world to the problems of the ocean world through what you are doing and then what you are collectively doing with Whale Seeker with Nets for Net Zero.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about, your take on this kind of, you're kind of addressing two problems with I shouldn't say killing two birds with one stone.
I use that expression.
Not a good
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. You're freeing two birds to live healthy lives with one, I don't know.
Right.
So what's your take on this? Because we hear a lot about fast fashion, we hear a lot about this kind of stuff. What's your how are you addressing this?
I think the best way I can explain it, that I found to explain to me, net zero is the goal.
Yeah.
And circularity is the method.
Okay.
Right? So that's kind of how I see it, because in a sense, when I'll bring it back to Aquaphyl, when I saw this model and the partnership with Healthy Seas and everything that brings, I'm like, this is a model that works.
Yeah.
And I was able to do it on a small scale. So I thought, yes, I was driving sort of, things in fashion, but I also see now a much bigger opportunity to drive circularity in multiple industries, because the more I interact with people like you, David, and Emily, and it's bringing these people together to sort of drive these solutions, because circularity is not something you can do alone. It requires partnerships. It requires different industries to collaborate. It's something as crazy as whale detection, where I was like, hey, can we use that technology and just use it for this problem? And then it turns out that sometimes you can, sometimes you can. But it's by it's asking those questions and sort of creating those networks. So we're talking about biosphere and ecosystems, but circularity is an ecosystem of its own, and it's really transforming a linear model to a circular model, because the take, make, waste is not working. If we're looking at it from an overfishing perspective, and I'm sure a lot of people have watched Seaspiracy at this point, which is finally illustrating the real issue. It's once I saw, I've always been passionate about the ocean. I've always, from being a little, I went to marine biology science camp when I was 8 years old. I was obsessed with whales. But all that to say is, I didn't go on to study it, but this is where I also see, that issue that I saw so young. When I realized through this experience, I'm like, this is still present and it's even worse, and here's how we can fix it. And I think once you see a solution, you can't unsee it. And I just thought, how can we drive this? How can we apply this to different industries? And so I think that's also where Nets for Net Zero comes from. It's seeing that here's a problem that's in the ocean. Here's how we can repurpose it, and also fix the plastic problem. We can use this for so many different applications, but like Emily was alluding to earlier as well, there's still huge gaps in knowledge, and we need to address that. And that's where, again, working with marine biologists, AI, supply chain, there's so many different things that need to come together for this to work. But the more people you have on board, the more you build this ecosystem, the more efficient it becomes as well. So I think that's where I'm coming from yes, fashion is a huge thing, and it's still, I think in Canada, it's something like 8 or 9% of landfills are textile waste, and we still haven't found solutions to any of that, right? So I think, yeah, that's where I'm really coming from, is kind of constantly trying to bridge that gap between innovation and product, so that we can drive these circular mechanisms, essentially.
And go ahead.
Well, sorry, David, but that's what was most exciting to me about talking with Nina, is that, Whale Seeker is really focused on the front end of this problem. And I never really considered how further down the supply chain this could be still sustainable. And so to have someone so knowledgeable about how we could recycle these materials, how they could be used and then recycled, it was so inspiring to me, that I was just more than happy to jump on board with her.
That first call changed everything.
It did. It really did.
Awesome. And one of the things that is enabling us to do these activities now is technology. Like we wouldn't be able to seek whales. Like I remember I've taught remote sensing. I used to teach at Concordia for like whatever 5 or 6 years, and the first lecture I gave was on the example I used was something called the Bavarian pigeon core. Have you ever heard of this before?
No, what is it?
First example of remote sensing was, well, one of the first was the Germans, and they put little cameras. Of course, the Germans would do this. They put cameras on,
Right.
and they'd like send the pigeons away, and it'd be an automatic timer, and so they would take pictures of the cities, right? Because they wanted to topograph for military purposes, and then the pigeons would come back. But it was funny because I'm teaching remote sensing. I say, well, what is the problem with this? And there's like, here's image one, and there's like the wing is halfway in the image, and it's like unregistered. But I mean, that was a very early example. The French used kites and so forth of getting imagery from space, from above. Whereas now, the technology that you're able to use with drones and satellite-based remote sensing, radar and IR, that's really kind of changing the game. Maybe can you talk a bit about the tech side of what you're doing, both of you?
You bet. Yep, happily. So the great thing about remote sensed imagery is that it's non-invasive.
Mhm.
So the ways that we used to understand how whales integrated, with their environment, with other species, how they moved was by tagging them, and we still do that. But remote sensed imagery is a way that we can observe them without bothering them. And a lot of the species that we're interested in observing are endangered, so we want to make sure that we don't bother them more than is absolutely necessary. And so there are still tags put on them so that we can understand how they move and what they do, so that we can develop ways and policies to avoid them and make sure that we don't harm them. But what's really exciting about Whale Seeker is that we are focused on images. So, and what's special about images is that they can detect where whales are precisely in space and time, which is not something that audio uh, data gives you. So audio and visual are really complementary methods of detecting whales, and we're working on a paired system. But you know traditionally, let's say the government runs an aerial survey. So there's cameras on the bellies of airplanes, and they take 500,000 images. So, over a whole summer, every 3 seconds, they take a picture.
Mhm.
But the only images that they analyze are images that the biologists in the airplane have flagged as images where there might be whales. So, but humans are fallible, like I know, like everybody knows, and when our attention span varies throughout the day, between days, between people. So this method of detecting whales is not very standardized, and it's not fast either, because the traditional way of analyzing these images is to get an expert like Bertrand, my husband, who's a marine biologist, to look at all of these images and say, is this a whale? Is this not a whale? This takes months and months, and so the actions that can be taken based on the data that was taken has a lag of 1 month to a year's time. And that's not effective policy
Mhm.
if someone's interested in, dynamic fishing zones or fishing lanes. And so what we are working on is sort of a camera agnostic method of detecting whales affordably, so that anyone who's interested, so maybe there's an independent port
Mhm.
that's interested in monitoring for whales as well as their marine traffic, they can do that. The government that does aerial surveys, we analyze their images as well.
Mhm.
um, for example, industries that are forced to comply to whale detection
Mhm.
is the oil and gas industry, when they're using their seismic vessels, they need to make sure that there's a marine mammal free zone around them when they're using their air guns underwater. And that's traditionally done by a human with binoculars surveying a 3 to 7 kilometer zone around a ship, which is,
Yeah.
you know, a valiant task, but bound for failure.
Right.
So what we're working on is a way to enable all of these industries to detect whales as fast as possible. And because there's so much variation in the water, in the different whale species, in the environment, in the daylight, and everything, AI is primed to crunch all of this data that only humans could before. So what we're aiming for is human level accuracy, but much, 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 much faster.
So we had a question that I just want to address now. It's from Lauren. For Emily, has any Arctic industries, example mining companies, reached out to you to help them detect whales as they ship materials out of the north where marine
Yep.
wildlife is concerned? So you do get like FedNav and these other kind of transport logistic companies. Are they clients of yours or?
Yeah, so it's not the shipping companies, it's the mining companies. So they need to comply with environmental impact assessments and monitoring. And so that's part of our business as well. Yep, is making sure that the development in the Arctic is accurately detecting the marine mammal population. And yeah, we're not in charge of how the data is used or how it's interpreted. We just give the detection data to the biologists, either at the independent consulting company that's in charge of the environmental monitoring, or the government, or the mining company, and then they do what they want to with the data.
Yeah.
But our job is to make sure that everyone has access to fast, reliable data, no matter where they come from.
Awesome. And Nina, the you're using tech like in terms of the materials you're getting with the supplier that you deal with.
Mhm.
But what other ways is technology influencing what you're doing with the business?
Yeah, I think it's so powerful what technology can do today. And I think like everything Emily just said, it's like it comes down to, yeah, better data, more accuracy, more speed. But when I think of it from before I understood what things like blockchain that you taught me a lot about, David, but you know, before I really understood what technology could do, is sort of looking at it and like, how can we create more sort of, there was this issue of transparency, and I think technology is a tool to give that.
Mm.
And so when I sort of started thinking about it from that perspective, I was like, okay, just like, you know, you want to give these different industries and companies better information to detect whales. It's like, how can consumers, like if I go back to fashion, how can consumers make an educated decision about their purchase without having the accurate information? Because
Right.
you go into a store and all you see is a price tag, and
Yep.
you may have a bit of information on the label, but the general population, you know, we don't know what that label means. And it's so minimal in terms of, it could say recycled content, but we don't really know. And then how much water was used, all that to say there's a lot of data points that are missing. And so as I just, yeah, I think it comes down to, I just see it as a tool for transparency. And and there's so much innovation that's happening in that space, and how we can use different technology, whether it's satellite imagery to, you know, find ghost fishing gear faster and more efficiently, knowing the size of it so that we can remove it and things like that. I think those are things that will come fairly quickly, hopefully, with everything we're working on. But then again, it's like connecting that sort of story, because it is a story at the end of the day. Like, we don't see what happens under the ocean. So if we can give eyes through technology into what's actually happening with biodiversity, what's happening underwater, and then bringing that and tying it to the product and to the story behind it, I think that's really powerful for consumers to be able to make decisions based on their values. Because I think a lot of people want to make more, you know, responsible choices, whatever that means for them.
Yeah.
But we're not given the right information to make those decisions the way products are made and sold today. So that's where I see there's a huge gap
Mhm.
to fill with technology.
I want to see that with bananas.
With bananas.
Seriously.
There's a book. Isn't there a book about like the impact of a banana?
Probably. I don't know.
I don't know. Tell us
Well,
about bananas, David.
I always buy organic bananas. Like I really like, and I do it largely because they taste better. Like I think they're just better product. But the other day I bought regular bananas because the organic ones were like green. You know what I mean? Sometimes they come in.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to eat that. It's going to take like a week, right? So I
Yeah.
bought the regular ones, and then they just don't taste as good. They kind of suck, right? But what would be cool though, and this is the reason why I'm bringing this up, is like, what if there was like a QR code on the bananas, and I could go dude and like through the blockchain technology see where that banana came from, like the organic one came from Guatemala, and you get like real information that talks about the story of that banana as opposed to this banana. The other one's like, well, this came from a huge farm of deforested land in Brazil. So I think there's a lot of potential there. And of course, we've talked about this, Nina and Emily, in terms of the use of blockchain.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I love this topic, and we've talked about it a lot. But it's like we don't see what happens beneath the water, right? And I
Yeah.
remember like one of my first dives, or actually this time I was diving in Thailand a few years ago, and this is one of the most pristine diving spots. It's called Richelieu Rock. If you're a diver, you might know about this spot. It is insanely beautiful. It's one of the top 10 dive sites in the world, and it's like 25-meter walls of coral, like insane. And yeah, like just thinking about it, I'm still like I'm in La La Land. But I remember being on the boat, and I was on this boat for 4 days. It was my first time doing something like that. And I remember the dive guides, like they're diving there, that's their job, right? They're there every day. They're like, oh yeah, just watch out because there's some dynamite fishing around here.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, I was like, I don't need to understand what dynamite fishing is. And I remember diving in the bottom and seeing like ghost fishing gear. And you're just thinking, like, if this is here where tourists are diving, where this is supposed to be like a protected area,
Mhm.
what's going on further than that? And it's seeing that with your own, like we're so used to being on Earth and seeing what's going on around us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we protect it more. And there's so much more protection on land than there is underwater, because there's just less eyes. And then once you see it, you can't really unsee that.
Mhm. Well, when what you're talking, like the points we've talked about technology, like in both of you are, you're innovating, right? You're innovators in your spaces, right? But innovation isn't limited necessarily to technology alone, right? And particularly right now, when we look at some of the major problems we're facing with loss of biodiversity and impact on ecosystems and so forth, and climate change, what is your take on the broad scope of innovation? Like social innovation, innovation in policy. Like how can like you guys can innovate in your business because that's what you do. But at the same time, there needs to be legislation and regulations. Social norms need to change, right? We've talked about people's kind of habits, values, and the way they do things. What's your perspective on this, the broad scope of innovation?
Yeah, so I'll tackle maybe the front end of the supply chain aspect, and Nina can tackle the back end of it.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, something that's really frustrating is that there's this sort of left and right. Either you're for good or you're for profit. You are either an NGO or you want to be this unicorn, and you only care about the bottom line, which is, how much money you make.
Mhm.
And this idea of being for good and for profit
Mhm.
is relatively new,
Mhm.
and there's not a lot of support for this sort of in between space of people who are wanting to innovate in lots of different areas. We're looking at the blue economy, and wanting to make sure that we're innovating and offering something globally at scale to lots of different industries, and that's so not the way things are done, that people aren't very receptive to it. They're very skeptical of it. So we sort of lose on the NGO side of things, as we lose on the for-profit VC side of things. And I I really think that, especially post COVID, we need to rethink about how we're going to rebuild the economy and how we're going to address global problems. And everything needs to be accessible, and it can't be a solution that's just available to, you know, WWF or Exxon.
Right.
It needs to be a solution that crosses industries,
Mhm.
that's thinking more broadly.
Mhm.
And I think that's the frame of mind that I'm happy to see more of, that we're struggling to fight against,
Mhm.
on my side of things. And so, especially innovation, the government and investors and different companies, they're really pro innovation,
Mhm.
but they want innovation that's de-risked,
Mhm.
that's already been proven. But at that point, you're not innovating anymore. It's something that's already tried and true. And so there's this really juxtaposition between people wanting to innovate and have new ideas, but not willing to take the risk on this new innovation.
Mhm.
And that's a big problem that I see.
Yeah.
And between what people say they want and what they're actually willing to put their money on.
Well,
Yeah.
that's it. That's it.
The
Money.
economics.
I had a discussion with a friend of mine the other day about that. Yesterday, we were going for a walk, and it's like, you know, money. What is they? Money talks, opportunity walks, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Nina, one thing that I find really interesting, and I want to get your take on it, which does relate to this idea of social innovation, is you still sell stuff, right? You are selling
Yeah.
garments, masks,
Yeah.
handbags, stuff to people.
Yeah.
So, how do you deal with, like, how do you create this, like, how do you market to these people and kind of entice them to make a decision with with their purchase that has these other lateral benefits without what is it really influencing people's decision? Is it the product? Do they care about any of the other stuff, or is it just they like your product?
It's, I would say generally, like, it's a really good question because honestly, at the beginning, it was really tough
Mhm.
to find, especially if I go back like 4 or 5 years, which isn't that long ago.
Mhm.
There was so much greenwashing and so much distrust they're like, well, it's like, okay, why am I going to pay a certain price for something if we don't, like, you say it's sustainable or whatever, but people don't really know, right? And so I guess from a consumer standpoint, like, it was interesting because at first I'm like, okay, people, what I started to understand, I'm like, people will first buy something because of the product fits their lifestyle. So whether it's performance based, like, it needs to be comfortable, it needs to be, a good overall product.
Mhm.
Then where they'll pay a little bit more, I would say 10 to 20% more, is for those ethical sustainability points.
Okay.
Essentially, that's sort of what I saw. At first, I overestimated, how important sustainability would be in so much person. I'm like, this is, it's a great product that it saves the planet. But I realized, I'm like, people care, but not that much, like, and this was perfect. But now, what I started to see as well, like with time, is businesses, and a lot of it was in the B Corp community. And I started reaching out to corporations instead
Mhm.
and focusing my energy on that. And that was a lot more productive.
I see. Okay.
So I think that businesses see see more of an incentive in turning to sustainability when you target the right ones. And another important lesson that I've learned in that process is you can't convince someone who doesn't already have those values. So if you go to the people who are already speaking that language, who already care about these issues, it's
Mhm.
going to be a lot, it's a lot easier. And thankfully the masses are starting to shift. So now you're seeing that there's a lot more emphasis on, especially with COVID and everything, like purchasing local. Like, we've seen the vulnerabilities of our supply chains. We've seen more and more issues arise. And so I think now we're at this really interesting time where consumers are doing a massive shift in their purchasing decisions.
Mhm.
And also governments, if we go to like sort of policy and innovation, governments, like, there's climate, like, circularity. If you look at the sort of economic plans, 2020 to 2030 for, city of Montreal, the federal government, like, circularity is written all over it. And there's grants and policy in place, or that's starting to come into place in order to support that. So that once there's that, you know, larger systematic shift
Mhm.
towards sustainability, and we can get those sort of like the economics are going to just look a lot better. I
Mhm.
think that's going to incentivize a lot more people to purchase sustainably, because when we can do it on a larger scale, like when there's a lot of those aquaphyls out there,
Mhm.
it's just the system becomes more efficient. So policy for sure needs to be a driving force, but then it also needs to fit with what people want in terms of their values and
Mhm.
how they see the world going. So
Yeah, and I think that government incentives too are really an important piece of the
yeah,
puzzle, because yeah, because the people that I'm talking to monitor whales, they don't want to hit a whale. They don't want their business to impact, biodiversity. But what's their alternative? So if there were subsidies created for biodiversity offsets or carbon credits that were much more tangible than what they are today. That, I mean, I there aren't many jerks out there who say like, we don't care about the whales, we don't care about fisheries, we don't care about biodiversity. Like, of course, they all do, but not when it affects their bottom line. So if there were ways for the government to maybe offset
Mhm.
some of these actions,
Yeah.
it would be welcomed by many different industries.
Considering the budget that landed yesterday, there's
Yeah,
got to be a bit of
exactly.
money in that. I hope, like, that's a lot of cash, like.
It is a lot of cash. Yeah, it's really hopeful. It's really hopeful for sure. Yeah.
but even
But
there,
but I
oh
But in terms of what Nina's talking about too, stepping away from my whale seeker hat and just as a normal consumer, we don't have very much information.
Yeah.
So if there was a solution where I could know where my t-shirt came from,
Yeah.
I would not pay double the price for it, but I would pay a little bit more
Yeah.
to know that it came, like where it came from, what the story was behind it. And I do think that technology and blockchain specifically is the solution to those type of choices, because especially, Nina, you brought up Seaspiracy.
yeah,
There's just a lot of mistrust in the types of labeling that there is, and what does organic mean, what does sustainable mean. And if there was a way to actually know what the supply chain was behind what we were buying, I think a lot of consumers would be really interested in
Mhm. I can
oh
see that solution for sure.
that. Yeah.
Um, Gender. What about?
Yeah, Nina and I met before before this chat, and we specifically talked about this question. And
yeah,
what did we want to talk about specifically? Nina
Well,
and I come from
yeah.
well, when Nina and I come from very different backgrounds, so we have different experiences, which is great.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but I come from science,
Mhm.
and I like most definitely um during my master's was told that my uterus was not my own during this time.
What?
And yep. And so there's just lots of little things that I've dealt with, that as the CEO of my own company, I've been very happy to be able to say, I you look very good. You have a very good price, but you're a jerk, so I don't want to work with you. And valuing people's ethics instead of just the single bottom line, looking at the triple bottom line.
Yeah.
And how can my company succeed, looking at environmental issues, social issues, and as well as profitability.
Mhm.
um, but what I'm really thankful for is that my co-founders are men, and they've supported me in times when, you know, I've been discriminated against.
Mhm.
And there have been many times when my co-founders thought, oh, you know, sexism isn't alive and well
Mhm.
anymore. It surely is.
Mhm.
And they've been really surprised just working with me
Mhm.
and in trying to grow this company,
Mhm.
how just daily the sexism occurs. Um, so for example, we've dropped some projects entirely because some researchers didn't want to talk to a woman. They only wanted to talk to a man.
What?
And so, yeah. And so, yep. So we had a postdoc that we were considering hiring. And I said, you know, within our detection system, we would like a sort of a sensitivity scale so that we can, you know, depending on who the client is, you know, how sensitive do they want? Do they want all the maybes to be considered whales, or do they want just the obvious whales to be considered whales?
Mhm.
And we had someone say, you know, I don't understand what this woman is saying. You know, talking to my CTO and saying, can you translate for her what she just said? And he took my exact words on purpose, and the person responded really, um, you know, professionally to him.
Mhm.
And after we had that interaction, you know, my CTO said, did I just witness what I witnessed?
Mhm.
And for him, it was novel,
Mhm.
but for me, it was not.
Mhm.
You know, so I guess part of our my journey with Whale Seeker is showing the realities of growing a company, um, you know, from a woman's point of view to men, and they've been really surprised at sort of just how petty and how frequently this type of interaction happens.
Mhm. It's you know, speaking as a guy who's been in business for a while, like, you know, it's I know it exists, but I don't experience it on a regular basis. So, you know, like it's like systemic racism. Like you could say, wow, it's like, well, if you don't experience it, it's hard for you to judge whether or not it exists or not, right? Like it's a difficult.
I, I mean, you do experience it, but you experience the positive side of it.
Correct.
Like you're taken at your word, you know,
Yeah.
you're taken seriously, and so yeah.
Often.
It's a strange dynamic.
Once in
It's
a while and taken seriously. Not very
Yeah.
often. Well, like 1/10 of the time. Um,
But Nina has a different experience. So Nina, tell us about how you feel
yeah.
gender has impacted your experience, your growth.
Yeah, it's funny because it's to the point where we felt we're like, how are we going to address this one? Because there's so many different angles you can like.
Yeah.
I have 100 examples, but I think like okay, in my case, to sort of sum it up, like as a kid growing up, like my grandmother had her own store, like she was kind of her own boss. You know, my mom very entrepreneurial, like tons of entrepreneurs in my family. So, and as a kid, I was very athletic, and so I hung out with guys, and so I always felt in my comfort zone with guys almost more than with girls. But sometimes like that was just the nature of who I was. Like I was a really sporty kid and whatever. And so I never saw like growing up, I never thought that I would be limited by any means by being female.
mhm.
And then I went into research and where I worked in psychology, which again is a very female dominated industry. So I had tons of examples of like strong, you know, smart women. And so it didn't really phase me. And it's not until I was at the sort of like the McGill Dobson Cup and then started getting into entrepreneurship and was taking business classes where it was such a shock to me how um essentially like everything that Emily described I started to experience, and it was so strange because I can pinpoint so many small examples,
Mhm.
but from being in a pitch, you know, in front of judges that I really highly respected, I knew who they were and everything, and being judged on like the color of my lipstick and the fact that I had blonde hair by another woman, and I was like, this is interesting, I don't think that's part of the pitch, but sure. And like so you have all these little moments, and I remember even pitching in the Dobson Cup, and then all the judges are male, sorry. And so it was like all these little moments where I was like, okay, now I get what it's, now I understand. And so I think it's an interesting process because you see the dynamics. Like even like my brother was working with me in the company, and I saw sometimes how they would respond to him as opposed to me, and like you start to notice these things, whether it's emails or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think overall, like I never in my mind let it limit sort of what I could or could not do, but I've definitely had to fight for my voice. And I can think even today, even just I can think of examples last week,
Mhm.
where I was working, you know, with certain males where I was debating whether or not to stay in the project purely because of how I was being spoken to.
Mm.
And to me, I'm like, I shouldn't have to make a decision based on that. And sometimes you question, you're like, is it, because you start to wonder, is it what I said or is it my perception of what? And so it kind of messes with you in a sense, right? So because you're constantly having to reevaluate and recheck yourself. You're like, is it me or is it because I'm a woman now? Like, or maybe I did say something wrong. You know? So it's kind of like this constant process of having to keep yourself in check.
Mhm.
And or that's how I felt it in the last few years, you know, taking on this sort of like business entrepreneurship role. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, there's also, I've been mentored by some amazing women as well. And I felt that really made a difference at some point. Because even early on, like in through different things, you know, I had some great mentors, but they were all men and they were fantastic. And I, you know, I needed those examples and those mentors as well. But having that balance of female mentors really, it helps sort of balance my process a little bit, and how to deal with certain issues when they arise, and also how to stand your ground in those scenarios.
Mhm.
But I think that's especially, Nina, why it's important to have male allies
That
to
for sure.
specifically go, okay, I'm going to take her words exactly to prove a point,
Yeah.
and they're going to respond to me, and this is going to be indicative of us, you know,
Yeah.
not moving forward with this contract or not hiring this person, or you know. And so I think, you know, in terms of, you know, from our point of view, it sucks, and but we're used to it by now. But I think in terms of what can men do is maybe echo what the women say instead of standing up for them. You know, there's maybe more subtleties and ways that you can support women in science or in entrepreneurship or in any venture.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, you know, to really echo what their voices are, to say she's she's the one that you should be listening to. Stop deferring to me.
Mhm.
Or, you know, these are all examples of things that have actually happened. And even with our, you know, like government funding, when my two co-founders and I have gone into an office, I will be doing the whole pitch, and then the old white man will say, will look to my co-founders and say, and ask them questions, and I will answer, and it'll take a while for them to go, oh, you're in charge,
Yeah.
you know.
Just show
But
up.
it takes a while for my co-founders to go, ask Emily. Emily knows this answer, she's the one to ask.
Mhm.
And it's really, you know, it's really frustrating for me, but it's also frustrating for them because they're not used to dealing with that crap. And they're seeing it more now because we're working closely together. And I think it's a good thing,
Mhm.
you know, for more men to see what happens daily. You know, we're questioned more, we're doubted more, we have to provide more evidence, more whatever.
Mhm.
And men are taken more at their word. And so even though I'm the biologist and my CTO is an engineer,
Mhm.
you know, some people will listen to him more about environmental issues than they will to me, just because he's a man. And, you know, that drives me crazy, but it drives him crazy too. So I
Yeah,
think it's,
waste of energy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of my first experiences with this, I mean, in the professional context, was in first year engineering. When I was at a co-op program at Waterloo in systems design engineering, and I got hired, and I went to like Blenheim, like southwestern Ontario, to work at a big manufacturing plant. Like we did like school term, work term, school term, work term, school term. That's how the co-op program works there at Waterloo. And I arrived, and it was interesting because the previous person that had been hired from co-op was a female mechanical engineering student, and she did a co-op and was just finishing up. And the co-op coordinator came to visit the site, like, because they have these guys, they're all men who went around and checked in to see if everything's okay. And I was sitting there in this meeting with this guy from Waterloo who came, and I'm supposed to be all, because I'm part getting evaluated in some ways, right? And the co-op coordinator said to my boss, Terry, who's a hardcore mechanical engineer, he said, you know what, Terry, I really want to thank you for hiring a woman, like the last woman that was hired, you know, like really, like it was just really great of you to hire, you know, to hire a woman engineer for this job. And, you know, and I'm sitting there going kind of at that point, like this is a long time ago, and a little conflicted. I'm like, well, but then he answered it for me. Like he gave the response that I felt was appropriate. He looked at this guy, and this guy, my boss, Terry, was so hardcore. And he just looks and goes, I hired her because she was the best person for the job. Period. End of story. And that was that. That was the discussion.
Like, I wish it could always be like that.
Yeah.
That, and it should be, but
Yeah.
it's just not yet, but we're getting better.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and in those, I like that story because it just cuts through all the kind of like, oh, you know, way to go, you know, way to, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So we're kind of pushing an hour. I knew this was going to go a long time because I knew we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Does anybody have any questions from the crowd? We still got quite a few people still on. The last thing I want to end with is standards and sustainability. Like I know both of you had mentioned, because what we're looking at right now, actually I've got a question here, Brendan. I'll get to Brendan's question in 1 sec. Actually, Brendan, I own a pair of shorts made out of recycled plastic bottles and they are great, but the design pattern is not at all interesting. So I was curious if it would be possible to tell a story of sustainability in the clothing design itself, meaning like actually like show it somehow. Is that what you're getting at, Brendan?
Go for it, Nina.
Yeah. No, I think it's funny because I've been thinking about that, is how do we kind of, how do we tell that story? And there's actually something interesting also that I want to bring with like, it's probably Reprieve, the material that those shorts are made of. So
graphics, he's like in graphics or something like that.
Yeah. So but that's the thing is I think there's so many interesting ways and I'm exploring some ideas right now in terms of how to kind of tell the story, but in a very simple way. But yeah, I think it's definitely like the piece should tell a story. And I think one thing that I'm looking at different ways of incorporating is, for example, I'm like, how do we get that feeling of the actual fishing net into the clothes? So there's this company called like Brace Nets, and they make bracelets, but they don't transform it like Aquaphyl does, and they're partners of Healthy Seas as well. And I always think, I'm like, how can we, because then you really feel the net. You connect more with the story when you feel the raw material. And I always try to think of ways where we can kind of incorporate these things.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're building, or as I'm sort of working on the next collection right now, those are definitely I think excellent ways. Like art expresses emotion, it expresses story. And I think there's so many ways we can push that. And I don't know if that really answered the question.
Yeah.
All that to say is I think it's an interesting thing to play with, and there's definitely a lot of possibilities and more brands. There's another one, I forget the name off the top of my head, but they make kind of like loungewear, I think kind of like sweatpants and sweatshirts and things like that, but from a material that's from like seaweeds or something that's supposedly biodegradable. So they do a really good job of having really simple little graphics that tell the story of that pair of shorts or that sweater. So,
but also you shouldn't have to choose between fashion and sustainability, right?
Oh.
Like you should be able to have ethically sourced materials in something that fits you well and works well and all that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's become like, it's just the way things are done. And it's getting there because there are some like Puma's doing pretty good stuff. Zegna, like a menswear company, an Italian menswear, Zegna is like, I didn't know it before I read about their CEO's commitment to this stuff, but they make nice suits. Zegna suits are like, minimum $2,000, $2,500 plus, usually $3,000. Nice Italian suits. And they're big into biodiversity, right? Yeah. So
That's
it's, but I have a question here from Mallory. Nina, what is the end of life process for your products? How is the loop closed? So are you closing the loop? If so, how?
So there's two parts to that. So basically, right now, what I'm going to implement, which isn't because our products haven't been on the market that long, so we haven't had any been returned, but I do want to be able to take them back. So I'm working on some programs to do that.
Mhm.
And then what's really cool, like, okay, so one big challenge with materials and sort of having that circular process is often they're mixed, like textiles are often mixed fibers. So you'll have like, for example, if you look at sportswear, it's typically going to be made from like nylon or polyester, but then it's mixed with like some type of spandex.
Mhm.
So to make it sort of wearable and stretchy and stuff like that. So you'll have different blends and weights and whatever, but basically, so when you're trying to do something fully circular, like there's some materials that we can use for bags and things like that that are 100% EcoNil, so 100% nylon.
Mhm.
So that's great because that can be fully reintegrated into the supply chain.
Mhm.
Um, where there's innovation needed, and I know Aquaphyl is precisely working on this right now, is how, and a lot of companies are, but how to divide those fibers. So when we can figure out how to divide the nylon from the spandex, which is, I'm fairly confident in the next year or two, we'll see that kind of become commercialized, is like sort of where I think where it's at. But yeah, once you can sort of divide those fibers, then you can start to recycle them. Because if not, what you have to do is downcycle, right? So it loses some quality. And so that's called like, there's a difference between like mechanical recycling and chemical recycling. I won't get into all the details, but basically that would involve like mechanical recycling. So that means like literally just like chopping it up, and then you could use it for, I don't know, probably insulation for something or whatever, but you're not truly being circular, like you're recycling, but there's only so many times you can do those steps. So it's more limiting. So yeah, I guess the answer there is there's still some innovation needed to fully do that, but where you do have 100% EcoNil nylon, we can today fully reintegrate and regenerate into something equal to a what we call a virgin material.
Mm.
So the same as a brand new material, basically.
And you both use B Corporation, and but in terms of standards, are there others like B Corp is B Corp and B Corp solid, like it's good. But are there other kind of sustainability standards that are unique to each of your, I know we've talked about this before, but are
Yeah.
those you're looking at, like, you know, in forest, to be the FSC certified timber? What is your take on those kind of things? Are they needed, or is there more work that needs to be done on that?
Yeah, I think standards and certifications in the fashion. So there's a couple that I typically like. There's the ISO certifications, but today like they're important, but they don't say that much about your process or your sustainability. Like you have quality management things and whatever. But in terms of like a standard that I always look for is the global recycled standard.
Mhm.
That's one. But other than that, also the other certification I've looked for in the past and still do today is the REACH certification, because it's a European certification ensuring no harmful chemicals are being used, and they go through about 160 tests. So those are the kind of standards that I've looked for, but I've had these conversations about standards for the fashion industry with lots of different people in different kinds of positions, and it is a huge challenge in terms of like there's a lot of issues with how we label things, and if we could have a standard where labeling was more accurate, that would avoid a lot of greenwashing. Because when you just say, like right now you can just say something's recycled, but you don't know if that's 2% recycled or 100% recycled.
Mm,
When
okay.
you're selling something that's actually 100% recycled and you actually put the work in, you're not really getting any sort of credit, you know what I mean? It's like
Mm,
it's not a level playing field.
yeah.
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 Emily, what's your take on standard certifications, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the certifications are something that are sort of nebulous, you know, and so there needs to be more transparency so that people can make more informed decisions
Mhm.
on whatever they're buying or what services they're using. And I think blockchain's a really powerful way to solve that problem. Yeah, but it really depends on, you know, if you're talking about eating seafood or buying a bag or a t-shirt,
Mhm.
or buying a car. um, you know, it's hard because people need to do their own research on what materials they're using and all this stuff. And so if there were more standardized certifications that people could trust,
Mhm.
it would be less work for them, and I think people would use it more.
Hmm. I got an idea. How about a net for net zero standard that utilizes blockchain full transparency, but not only applied to nets, but applied to anything that comes from the marine environment? You know what I mean? Fish,
Sold.
yeah?
I I'm on board.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Sold. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, if you're interested in Nets for Net Zero, we have a website, netsfornetzero.com.
Yeah.
Fun.
And same thing for Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So yeah, we're really excited to be collaborating across really unlikely industries.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
we're pushing 10:15 in Montreal time, so I know you guys are. It's getting late there. I haven't even had dinner.
Thanks, David.
So
Yeah.
thank you. No, thank you for coming out, Nina.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate your time and your input and the work that you guys are doing. Um, and everybody who's online, I'm sure, is very thankful for the great news and great work that you've shared with us tonight. So we will definitely follow you guys on social media, and I will keep these folks posted as to, and if you want contact information to learn more about what you're doing. I know the last time that we did something like this, well, the SDG one, I had a bunch of people saying, hey, I want to do something with this, one person said, I love the whale lady. And I'm like, okay, her name's Emily, but
Pretty
I'll
lovable.
take it. Yes.
so that's where things happen. And I know, like, I even see Paul on this and others in Montreal and elsewhere. There's a bunch of new things that are required in order to make this thing work all along the supply chain, like in terms of material science, the software side of things, the science side of things, all that kind of stuff. So if you're watching and you're interested and you want to reach out, then you know how to get a hold of me, and you can get a hold of Nina and Emily as well, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about what they're doing. Good.
So happy. Any innovations are always welcome, and ideas,
Yeah.
challenges, and bring it our way. We're ready.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thanks, David. We've had a really wonderful time.
It's been
Thank you
great.
so much for inviting us.
All right, we'll do the old whale seeker, like Free Willy with the whale as it goes over. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yep.
And we'll touch base when things open up in Montreal. You've got a couple drinks.
Sounds good. Yeah.